Good morning, everyone. Good morning. A couple seats to fill in. Welcome to Boston, and thank you so much for being here. Governor Healey, Speaker Pelosi, Congressman, well, I can't go down, there's too many luminaries in all the room. To all of our senators and members of Congress and all of our state and local public servants, thank you for your service in this moment, and to those who have already given a lifetime of service. To Jim Siegel and all of Barney's alumni from Boston, D.C., and beyond. To Jim Reddy and the entire Frank family, and to all those who knew and loved the Congressman, thank you for honoring us with your presence. Today we gather in one of the most historic spaces in America to celebrate one of the most consequential figures in American history. And it feels especially fitting that we're doing it here because, like Barney Frank, Faneuil Hall was built for argument. Congressman Frank believed that democracy works best when people say exactly what they mean, when we put it all out in the open. So today, I'm ready to start that fight. I challenge the assertion that the Congressman's greatest impact was at the federal level, because we claim him in the City of Champions first. I like to say that every great leader has some Boston in them, but very few have shaped the city of Boston as much as Congressman Frank. The Congressman got his start in politics right here in Boston on Kevin White's mayoral campaign in 1967 when he was still a PhD student. Kevin White had heard about this whip-smart kid from across the river and invited Barney Frank over to his house on Beacon Hill. As reported by Christopher Lydon, when he arrived, nobody answered the door. So, of course, he let himself in. And, of course, he didn't wait quietly in the hall. Instead, he started wandering around and found his way to the library, where he picked out a book and started reading. It was Ward 8 by Joseph Deneen. An hour later, he hadn't looked up, and Kevin White still hadn't shown up. So he left and took the book with him. Fortunately for Boston, he eventually brought it back. His meeting with Mayor White to return that book launched a career that would transform our city and country. When Mayor White won, Barney Frank dropped out of school to become his chief of staff. And that's when the trouble really started. The people who had run City Hall for generations were irked because Barney Frank didn't fit the mold. He was young, he was Jewish, he wasn't from here. A friend said he could have colonized Mars and never lost that Bayonne, Jersey accent. But it didn't take long for him to earn respect. He earned his place the way Boston politics makes you, by doing the work. In other words, it was pretty clear he finished reading that book. One colleague described him as the utility infielder, the utility outfielder, the speechwriter, the strategist, the consigliere, the professional pain in the butt. Fred Salvucci recalled a press conference at the start of Mayor White's second term, where the mayor introduced 8 new members of his leadership team. And the joke in City Hall was that Barney Frank had done all their jobs during the first term. But perhaps the Congressman's greatest legacy was changing how we do politics in Boston. He believed that government at its best could solve problems that mattered. And he trusted the people of Boston, all of Boston, to figure out those solutions. In leading the white administration, Barney Frank was unafraid to hire people who had been historically excluded from government and who, for that reason, needed to be part of government for us to have true impact. He brought the neighborhoods into city government, and he took city government out into the neighborhoods, establishing little city halls throughout the city for residents to raise and solve issues together. If you think testifying before Congress is intense, try hosting open office hours with Boston residents on parking, schools, and bike lanes. Barney Frank helps Boston tap into our spirit to fight for a better future. When a broad coalition protested the plan to build a massive new highway right through the middle of Jamaica Plain, Roxbury, and the South End, he brought them into City Hall, organizing a meeting between the mayor and a slate of Democratic Ward Committee reformers led by my dear friend, Judge Herb Hirschfang. 5 days later, Mayor White announced that he was joining the community-led opposition, which would save Amtrak service, the commuter rail, the Orange Line, create the Southwest Corridor. And to this day, if you ask Judge Hirschfang what tipped the scales, he'll say Barney Frank. And the congressman didn't stop there. He championed community schools so that adults could take evening classes and build community just like their kids. He grew Summer Thing so that all our neighborhoods could enjoy the gift of music. And as a state representative, knowing that children of Back Bay had nowhere to play, I see Rev. Livingstone here in the house, Barney Frank fought for the Clarendon Street playground to be established. He also listened so well to his Beacon Hill constituents that he once tried to abolish the 4th of July fireworks display, but that's a story for another day. For all of his accomplishments and all the arguments he won, he never shook the curiosity that had him wandering through a stranger's house and borrowing a book because he wanted to understand the city a little better. And he didn't know it at that time, but his fierce dedication to serving the whole city with his full self made it possible for generations of public servants to imagine themselves in government too, including many years later, an Asian American BPS mom who grew up in Chicago as a former math and Latin nerd, who grew to learn and love Boston just as a congressman did, so much so that she even ran for mayor. One of the memories I'll always treasure is getting to spend All right, that's old news by now. One of the memories I'll always treasure is getting to spend a standing room only evening at First Church in Jamaica Plain in September of 2024 at an event to rally Democrats for the November elections hosted by Paul Drolet and a community group from JP and beyond. Matt O'Malley and Ben Weber and I chimed in a few words feebly, and then we ceded the floor to brief remarks by Congressman Frank for the next hour. From his wheelchair, he let loose on the state of our democracy, fired us up about everything this moment demands of us, threw in a couple zingers that I can't unfortunately repeat today, but ultimately calmed all of us with the sense of faith that as long as we come together, we'll be okay. Barney Frank's legacy of service, curiosity, and coalition building with the little fight is one of the most precious gifts our city has ever received. May his memory be a blessing, and may he rest in peace.
Thank you, Mayor Wu. Barney was very impressed when you ran for governor, more impressed when you for mayor, sorry, governor. We're not urging anything here. But when you ran for mayor, he firsthand knew how difficult it was to get elected mayor of Boston. To get elected in your 30s, to get elected as a woman, to get elected as a woman of color, to get elected as a woman of color who grew up in Chicago was really impressive. He was even more impressed with your second campaign because you didn't have one. His whole life, he insisted that anyone who said they enjoyed campaigning was a liar. So, and he was a great congressman, not a great campaigner. Thank you all for coming. This is an amazing turnout. Barney would have loved to be here. His friends from City Hall days, from the State House, from Congress are all here. Thank you. It's a celebration of his life. This is not a funeral. In the last 3 weeks of his life, after he told us that he was in hospice, Jim and Barney and I talked about a service in Boston. And he said who he would like to speak. We didn't know we could get Faneuil Hall at the time because, of course, we didn't know dates. But this would have overjoyed him, as Mayor Wu said. The ghosts of his heroes, Samuel Adams, Frederick Douglass, Lucy Stone, William Lloyd Garrison, are in this building. They all spoke, and they were honored here. So he is, and also, this is the building he looked out on from his office in City Hall every day. It's also, when you walk outside and you look ahead 100 yards, you don't see anything, but you would have seen the central artery rising above the city. Fortunately, it was taken down about 25 years ago, and fortunately, when he said it would be cheaper to raise the city than to depress the artery, that did not hold. We were able to do it. Barney was very happy to have served in the city and in the state. We have speakers today. I am going to, since they are illustrious speakers, you all know them. I am not going to do a lengthy introduction for any of them, but just to announce their title and their name. Governor Healey.
Good morning, everyone. And Jim, thank you so much for all the care that you and others put into what truly is a celebration of an amazing person, an amazing American, and someone to whom we will always be grateful, both for what he did, and I think as importantly, what he showed us in terms of what needs to be done now in this moment. To Jim, in honoring Barney, we honor the extraordinary bond that the two of you shared. To Ann, Doris, and David, I know how much you miss your dear brother. To friends and colleagues, staff members who served with him, the list of electeds and former electeds is truly overwhelming. I hear you, Mayor, on that. I don't know that I've seen quite an assembly of people, past and present, who've gathered in honor of what this man has done. It's wonderful to have Speaker Pelosi here, Senator Dodd. We, of course, have Senator Warren, Senator Markey, Congressman Neal, Congressman McGovern, who we'll hear from, now President Meehan, once upon a time a congressman. The entire delegation is here, Whip Clark, everyone down the line. It's really a testament to this man. And, of course, on the state level, because he left City Hall and then spent some time in the State House. And so we're incredibly well represented by my predecessors, Governor Dukakis, Governor Patrick, Lieutenant Governor O'Neill, Secretary Kerry, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll. It's really something. And of course, Mayor Wu, thank you for your beautiful words and your beautiful welcome to all of us here this morning. We're here this morning in the cradle of liberty, For those of you who don't know, that's what we affectionately refer to Faneuil Hall as, the cradle of liberty. This is the cradle of liberty where, appropriately enough, we honor a giant of American democracy, a man we all loved, Barney. Now, now, Barney, I'm not left-handed, I'm not Jewish, but 1 out of 3 isn't bad. That man had a way with words, didn't he? Unbelievable. Happy Pride, by the way. Happy Pride. And we're proud to have known Barney. We're proud in Massachusetts to call Barney our own, notwithstanding that horrific New Jersey accent. And we're proud to be the state that sent him to Congress 16 times. There's never been anyone quite like him. I don't know that we'll see anyone quite like him again. Brilliant, fearless, hilarious. He could destroy a weak argument or a musing with a single line and leave you laughing. And I'm sure all of that will be recounted in great detail in the entertaining deliveries to come. But I think he was always, always guided by a deep moral seriousness. He couldn't stay silent in the face of suffering or back down from those who would justify it. Barney once said that the 2 things that bothered him the most were bigotry and poverty. The hunger of a 3-year-old, he said, outweighs, in my judgment, all other harms that can happen. To end that hunger and end all those harms, he brought to bear not only his intellect and wit, but everything he had. He was a masterful legislator, not just a fighter, but a strategist. And yes, a bridge builder. Just look at the breadth of issues that he touched. He was our champion for civil rights, an advocate for LGBT equality from his earliest days, including in the Massachusetts State House, the first to file gay rights legislation. He reestablished fairness and stability in our economy. He advanced health care access, reproductive rights, racial justice, immigrant rights, criminal justice reform, veterans benefits, environmental protection, animal cruelty, housing affordability, food security. His legacy, it seems, touches all of us. When you think about it, he's had an impact on the life course, the trajectory of Americans around this country. And what he has done has helped to move all of us closer to the promise of a democracy that belongs to everyone. Now, I want to say something about the impact that Barney Frank had on me. I think I was in high school when he came out publicly. I remember something about that, but of course, I hadn't even come out, so it didn't exactly hit at that time. But I will tell you, years later, when I made a decision to run for office, Barney Frank was the first person I thought of, because I knew that because of his bravery, and remember, this is the 80s. This is not today. This is not the 2000s. This is not the 1990s. This is the 1980s. Barney Frank showed incredible bravery, in my view, to, yes, answer the question posed to him by the reporter, I'm gay, so what? But what a masterful way to address that. And then, of course, he went on to this incredible career, showing up not just for the gay community, but showing up for all of us in so many ways, and becoming such an incredible force with such an impact on our country. But I just want to appreciate the bravery of someone like Barney Frank. One of the last times I saw him was at the service for Anne Maguire. Those of you who don't know Anne Maguire, she's a lesbian. She was also Tom Menino's campaign manager who brought him to be the mayor of Boston. And we were celebrating Anne's life. And I note Anne and I note Barney because I think for any of us who come from the community who have been able to get elected, even re-elected, even elected to other positions, it's because of trailblazers like Barney Frank, because of him. And it's safe to say I speak for those of us who benefited from that to just say, I know we would not be here today if it weren't for Barney Frank. The other thing I recall personally about Barney is a lot of discussions about DOMA. Back in 2013, when I was in the Attorney General's office, Mary Bonato and I led a case to challenge DOMA, which of course undermined marriage equality here in Massachusetts, stripping rights and benefits from lawfully married couples. We were the first state to challenge and successfully challenge that law, as affirmed by the Supreme Court in the Windsor decision. I want to credit Barney Frank for that win in many respects. See, years before, when DOMA was first introduced in 1996, it was introduced as a political strategy, of course, in that year's elections. It passed with overwhelming votes, but even as it did, Barney used that as an opportunity to lay the groundwork for equality, to lay the groundwork for something he knew would not happen right then, but would happen at some point. And at the time, I remember, he challenged any member of Congress to come forward and explain how their own marriage was threatened by the love and commitment of two women or two men. When they said it was not their marriages, but the institution that was threatened, he said on the House floor, that argument could only be made by someone in an institution because it has no logical basis whatsoever. And with that, acclimated the great body to the possibility, the potential of what marriage equality could really look like. And I note that because that was done 15 years before we filed that case and were successful. But he planted the seeds and gave people a greater understanding just by those very comments. And that's what he was about. Through his seriousness, through his humor, he managed to humanize issues. He managed to make them relevant, more accessible, more understood, even by those who held different views. What a power. What a gift. He also asked all of us to do the same. As upset as we were about certain things, as mad, as angry as we may be about certain things, he encouraged us to stay with it, to stay at it, and to do it in a way that would bring more people on board. Barney knew better than anyone that there is deep significance to who you are. But he also knew it didn't change the job description. It certainly shouldn't alter anyone's expectations that he would fight for him. I was watching footage, and I'm reminded of his successor, Congressman Kennedy, running the streets of New Bedford and engaging, well, he wasn't running exactly, but moving down the streets of New Bedford, engaging with constituents. You see, you could see in that and through so many other exchanges with the people he served. His constituents knew, they knew that he knew them and that he would always fight for them. Barney Frank never stopped delivering. Even when in the minority, even when denounced and demonized, he worked with joy, humor, passion, and also with strategy and pragmatism. He worked across parties and differences, negotiated difficult agreements, and took hard-earned wins, knowing he'd be back to fight another day. Barney, that day is ours now, and we pledge to carry on the work. We could use Barney's example right now. I know I'm feeling that this morning. I think I'm not alone in feeling that. Governor Mills and I talked about that just a few weeks ago when you visited with him in Maine. We know that. We know that. There's a lot of talk about authenticity as a way through to better politics. Barney was the real thing. For him, authenticity was not a performance, not a slogan, not a dog whistle. It was not a willingness to offend and not care who you hurt. It was not a purity that doesn't allow for compromise. Barney was simply himself, and he brought all of himself to the work of improving the lives of people he served, being himself without apology. That's what made him one of the greatest legislators, one of the greatest politicians, one of the greatest Americans of our time. And it made him, to me, an inspiration.
Thank you, Governor Healey, for those very moving words. I'm Jim Siegel. I've known Barney since I was a sophomore in college, and he was an assistant senior tutor resident. He was supposed to be in Winthrop House at Harvard to write his thesis, control rowdy undergraduates, and once in a while interact with them. Naturally, Barney turned that on his head. He never wrote his thesis. But he did love sitting in the dining room, smoking cigars, slightly disheveled, which he used to his advantage in a poster 10 years later, and engaging with students intellectually in the dining room, challenging them, not indoctrinating them, but challenging them, asking students why they believed that way, what they were doing. He loved the teaching aspect. He didn't really love the writing aspect. So he never did write the thesis. But 5 years later, we became very close. We'd invite him over for Passover and for Thanksgiving when he wasn't with his family, and he really became very close to our family. 5 years later, I was graduating law school with my classmate Ed Markey, and we had both decided to run for the state legislature. I got a call from Barney about February, and he said, you know, I'm going to run for the state legislature too, from Beacon Hill. Now, we had never thought in college that he would run for office. We thought that he'd be a high-level administrator to a president like Arthur Schlesinger, perhaps, but we didn't think he'd run on his own. His brilliance was recognized at Harvard, I might add. He had got a 4-page spread in the yearbook, the only junior faculty member to be recognized. He had as much recognition as the president of Harvard, but he decided he didn't want to be in academics. He decided he was going to run. And he said on that phone call, I'll never forget it, he said, you know what, and when we're elected, he said, we're going to vote for Tommy O'Neill for president of our class. And I said, Barney, if I'm elected, I'll be happy to vote for Tom O'Neill for president of our class. We were elected, and while I was still trying to find my office and figure out what was going on, Barney had 2 agenda items that he pursued immediately. One was, ironically, we never had a black senator in the state Senate in 200 years. The ironic part is that we had a United States senator who was black. Working with Mel King and Doris Bunty, 2 outstanding state representatives in our class, he devised a strategy that would get a black Senate majority district in the next redistricting, which was 1973. So Barney, working with Governor Sargent, a Republican, the minority leader, who were Republicans, and the newbies in our class, he devised a strategy that we would be able to sustain vetoes from Governor Sargent to the legislature. Barney was fearless. He took on the Senate leadership and the House leadership as a freshman. They never forgot. It came back 10 years later. But we won. After 4 vetoes, we sustained. We got a black Senate district, and Senator Bill Owens was elected. Again, it showed Barney's strategic sense, working with Republicans as well as Democrats to be able to do that. The other objective he had was to start the conversation on gay rights. He filed a bill to prohibit discrimination in housing and employment for gay people, and he roll-called the bill. He knew it was a long-term effort, but he did it. And the first bill received 23 votes. That was out of 240 at the time legislators. And he kept filing that bill while he was in the legislature. And I will say 30 years later, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court with Justice Marshall, I don't know if Justice Marshall is here or not, but they legalized gay marriage, the first state in the country to legalize gay marriage. Now, the court deserves the credit, clearly, for that, but also the conversation had continued, and it was accepted at that point. But more importantly, there was an effort to overturn by constitutional amendment that ruling, and it needed 50 votes out of 200, House and Senate at the time, 50 votes to put it on the ballot. So 30 years later, it got 45 votes, short of putting it on the ballot. It had reversed from 23 votes for to 155 votes the other way. Barney's strategy worked, and gay rights now is something he was most proud of at his death, that he had really furthered that, not only in Massachusetts, but nationally. I might say also that sometimes he went a little farther, and that he filed bills in 1973 to legalize prostitution, to legalize pornography, to legalize marijuana, to legalize gambling. Finally, a representative from New Bedford, Ed Corey, stood up and said, "Mr. Speaker, when is the representative from Back Bay going to stop? He's filed bills to legalize marijuana, prostitution, pornography, and I've had enough." And Barney stood up and said, "Mr. Speaker, it's true. I have filed those bills to legalize marijuana, pornography, prostitution, homosexuality. And Mr. Speaker, when I find out what the gentleman from New Bedford enjoys, I will stop." He also, when a governor was didn't recognize that there was a serious budget shortfall, he filed a bill to abolish the month of June. A number of years later, 30 years later, he asked me to become special counsel to the House Financial Services Committee when he became chairman. He was only chairman for 4 years, but those 4 years were something. He had joined House Financial Services to promote housing. He had no idea that he was going to become the expert on banking. It was an incredible time. The world really fell in 2008, and he and Senator Dodd had to work very closely to create a bill that would bail out the banks, something that they did not want to do, and it failed in the House until the Senate revived it, and then with Speaker Pelosi and Barney working on the Democratic caucus, it finally passed. It was not something he wanted to do, but he knew if he didn't do it, it would be worse than if he did do it. So we had a very difficult time in the House, and then he, 2 years later, he and Chris Dodd passed the Dodd-Frank Act, which is the most important financial bill that we've had. I did skip over 2 elections that he had. He ran for the House in 1980 when it vacated because the Pope told Father Jordan that he had to choose between priesthood and government, and he chose the priesthood. It opened up, and it was a very, very difficult race. It was a very tough time. David came up and ran the campaign. I helped persuade Barney to run in Brookline. And it was a nail-biter, but we lost about 25 of the 30 cities and towns. A lot of what he had said and filed bills in the legislature when he was from the Back Bay didn't really carry in Gardner and Fitchburg and Leominster as well. And, but Brookline and Newton, Brookline voted the Democratic registration was about 10,000, and we've got about 12,000 Democratic votes because the unenrolled voted. So we had 115% turnout in Brookline. And the same happened in Newton. So we were able to win in 1980, even though Ronald Reagan won in Massachusetts while Barney was swimming upstream. In 1982, the Senate leadership got back at Barney and totally redistricted him, took away his entire district, sent him down to New Bedford and Fall River, where Margaret Heckler was the 9-term incumbent. They couldn't take away Newton because Barney lived there. They tried to take away Brookline, but Speaker O'Neill would not take Brookline back. Speaker O'Neill said, you know, those people in Brookline are 1/10 of my district, and they write 10 times as many letters as everybody else. And he said, they even write to you when they agree with you. So Barney went from Brookline to New Bedford. He did not want to run in that race either. He was very reluctant. We persuaded him to run with choice words. And he did run the best campaign that I've ever seen in 1982. He defeated the 9-term incumbent. He had picked up an entire new district, which he loved. And I will say he loved having New Bedford and Fall River. He became an expert on fishing. People from all over, representatives from all over the country came to him to learn about fishing rules at that point. So he was a wonderful contributor to Massachusetts, but particularly to the federal government. He was brilliant, he was passionate, and as Bill Weld, former governor, texted me yesterday, he said he was a true titan. The other thing I will say, when I was up there, when I was in Washington in 2009, The Hill, a Washington paper, did a survey of all Republicans, and they said, who are the most partisan Democrats that you think? And then they did the same for the Democrats, asking for the Republicans. And Barney was very proud to be chosen as one of the 5 most partisan Democrats. He was a fierce protector of democratic values in the Democratic Party. They also asked, who were the 5 legislators who were the most bipartisan, who you would most like to work with? Barney also made that list. He was the only member to make both lists, and he was well beloved by both parties. There are so many people here that are distinguished and members of Congress that I really wanted to ask the members of Congress, former members and members who are here, if they would stand up to just show. And I will say many flew in from Colorado, Illinois, California. Speaker Pelosi came from California. It is really a credit to Barney, a man who's been out of office for 14 years. And look at this. So thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce his brother, David Frank.
I know New Jersey accents have been derided so far, so I apologize in advance. Many people knew Barney for his brain. In his family, we also knew him for his heart. Outside the media spotlight, he was a loyal, loving son, husband, brother, uncle, in-law, and cousin. Whenever he could, he showed up to celebrate, to console, or simply to get together. Often he was the first to suggest a family event. During COVID, as soon as we were vaccinated, he brought us all together for a reunion in Maine. About 25 years ago, when my soon-to-be wife expressed concern to Barney about a medical procedure I needed, he showed up at the hospital. That's who he was. Even with the demands of the congressional schedule, he always made time for his family. And what a marvelous uncle he was. My daughter Madeline, talking about the times she spent with her sister Sophie and Barney, told him, "You had this ability to meet us where we were as goofy kids without infantilizing us, letting us bend the rules just enough that we felt wild and creative and respected in a way that made me feel grown up and seen." We knew him for his sense of humor in public and in private. I'd like to think there was at least some upward mobility in the comedy department of our family, from the slapstick of the Three Stooges, one of whom married our father's first cousin, Gertrude Babe Frank, to Barney's wit. A wit that was still intact in his final days. Asked how it felt to be an icon, he said it was better than being an emoji. But mainly, I think, not of how funny he was, but of how caring he was. In 1960, when I was 10, my father died suddenly. My mother felt great pressure from my father's business partner, with whom he had co-owned a truck stop. What did Barney do? Instead of graduating with his classmates, dropped out of Harvard for a year to help however he could. Many people know Barney from his work with Senator Dodd to stabilize America's finances, crack down on abuses, and protect consumers. I saw how he stabilized our family finances, prevented abuses against us, and protected my mother, my sister, and me. When I was 7, I went to Barney's Bayonne High School graduation, and the director of student activities, Miss Glenn, said to me, "I hope you won't be like your brother." That puzzled me since I looked up to him. I'm not sure which transgression of authority she had in mind. He told me about once being in the principal's office and finding there another student, Chuck Wepner, who was being disciplined for fighting and claimed a fellow student had tried to beat him up. Later, Wepner, named by my uncle, the sports writer, as the Bayonne Bleeder, became the basis for the Rocky movies. So there were 2 skilled counterpunchers in the principal's office that day. In Bayonne, where we grew up, it was working class, long before that was a thing in politics. Our parents, who were staunch Democrats, cared deeply about the state of the world. We got about half a dozen newspapers at home. Barney managed to outlive most of them. He inhaled the news. He was deeply affected by the brutal murder of Emmett Till. From his teenage years onward, nothing could deaden Barney's conscience nor silence his voice. In 1964, he volunteered for Freedom Summer, registering black citizens to vote in Mississippi. Miss Glenn was right about one thing, Barney's impatience with all sorts of proprieties. When he ran for Congress in 1980, people remembered his earlier campaign poster, as Jimmy mentioned, neatness isn't everything. But neatness isn't nothing either. So when Barney asked Thalia Schlesinger to become his campaign press secretary, she had one non-negotiable demand, that he buy 3 new suits and 3 pairs of shoes. He said okay, and she marched him off to Brooks Brothers. In 1982, as Jimmy mentioned, when redistricting put Barney into a campaign that was 60% Margaret hecklers, we needed a secret weapon. Enter our mother, who cut a commercial by Dan Payne saying Barney would defend Social Security, helped him win by almost 20 points. It showed that family values didn't just belong to the right wing, and it launched our mom on a terrific second act as an advocate for seniors in the Commonwealth. Our family was proud of what Barney did in the House, whether it was working with Congressman Mineta on reparations and an apology to Japanese Americans sent to internment camps in World War II, or Dodd-Frank, or LGBTQ rights, and so much else. We were so proud of him when he married Jim. This spring, we were proud of Barney's typically unconventional media tour in hospice, providing a roadmap for the Democratic Party. And we knew that was only possible because of the incredible care and we knew that was only possible because of the incredible care he got from Jim in the last few months of his life, a boundless devotion reflecting what they had meant to each other for more than 20 years. So if Miss Glenn were here, I would reject her request and I not be like my brother. I've always wanted to be like him. I still do. A big brother who always got the big things right. A brother we could always count on. A brother who had the courage to think for himself and the courage to act on his beliefs. A brother who built on the fundamental decency and instinctive liberalism of our parents and used his considerable political skills in his own life to broaden our country's conception of liberty and justice for all.
A person well known throughout the country, but particularly in Boston, from the other city on the coast, Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Still morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. It's an honor to join all of you here to celebrate the life of our beloved friend and colleague, Chairman. He likes to be called Mr. Chairman Barney Frank. Today we gather with deep sadness, but also profound gratitude for him. Gratitude that our country was blessed by Barney's extraordinary intellect, his fearless conviction, his legendary wit, and above all, his unwavering commitment to justice. To his beloved husband, Jim, to his family, his friends, and all who loved him, we extend our deepest prayers and love. And I proudly bring the sympathy to the family from the Congress of the United States, as you see represented by so many House and Senate as well. from a House of Representatives loved Barney so much, appreciated him, learned from him. Thank you for sharing Barney Frank with the country. I'm glad that our colleagues have already stood up for that. May it bring comfort to know that Barney's legacy lives on. We know that, we've heard it, in the laws he helped write and the barriers he helped break down and the countless lives he touched with his legislation. America's working families have lost an iconic champion. Massachusetts lost one of its greatest public servants, and many of us have lost a treasured friend. For decades, Barney stood at the center of the great debates of our time. He deeply believed that government could be a force for good in people's lives to expand opportunity, protect consumers, expand and defend civil rights, and strengthen our democracy. He brought that belief to every fight. So I have many stories to tell you about how he did that and the rest, but I do invite myself to Washington, D.C. to tell some of them there at that, so that I will honor Barney's charge to me always: be brief. In moments of challenge, Barney brought clarity. In moments of uncertainty, he brought perspective. And in moments of tension, he often brought laughter. Barney possessed one of the sharpest minds in public life. He could dissect an argument in seconds. Yet behind that famous intellect was a generous spirit. And those are some of the stories I will tell you. These are stories that Barney liked me to tell. So one of them was that you all know Father Drinan, and you know that Father Drinan served in the Congress of the United States as a Jesuit. When Father Drinan passed away, I was asked to speak at his service, and Barney said, "Tell my story." And that was that His Holiness Pope John Paul had said that Father Drinan had to choose between being a Jesuit priest or a member of Congress. Thou art a priest forever. Father Drinan chose the path. But what Barney liked about that was when Father Drinan left the Congress, he wanted me to say to those in the church that day that I was absolutely sure His Holiness was glad that he was replaced by an openly gay man. He was always, shall we say, giving us direction. We were friends right from the start for many reasons, which I will go into in Washington, D.C. But here today, I just say that I had a big party for him in San Francisco when I was newly elected, and it was in the 90s. I was late 80s, but it was the 90s. Barney came. This was a big deal. Barney Frank is coming to town. My daughter, Christine, was just starting law school. I say that for a reason. So I'm about to introduce Barney, and I start to say, before we hear from our special guest, I just want to stipulate to a certain set of facts about what we have to do to win this election. Shouting from the audience, Barney says, "So Christine's going to law school, and now Nancy's stipulating to facts." Anyway, you mentioned Barney's talking about the Defense of Marriage Act. I remember when that bill came to the floor, it was a horrible thing. But the person who was proposing it had been married a number of times. So then Barney shouts out, "What are you protecting, your first marriage, your second marriage?" And that, of course, everything, repeal of donor which I could go into so many of this, but I just want to talk about one bill, the hate crimes bill, because this was so personal in his presentation. We had this bill we had a few bills that we were going to bring up, and we had them in order, and this one was the hate crimes bill, fully inclusive hate crimes bill. So we're just having some trouble getting out of committee, and people came to us and said, "If you take out trans, you can pass this in a minute." And Barney and I said, "If we take out trans, we won't pass it in 100 years because we're never going to bring it up that way." But what was important, and why I bring it up here today, is Barney then took control of the whole debate, went to the caucus. He spoke so personally about his youth as a teenager, his whole authenticity about himself, crying. We were all crying. It was the generosity of spirit of Barney Frank that day to make a difference in the lives of so many people. Of course, he then went around to the members with the mother of Matthew Shepard, and of course, we overwhelmingly passed the fully inclusive hate crime. It would not have happened without him. I can say that over and over again. And since the Dodd-Frank bill has been mentioned, I want you to know he gave me a lot of credit for that, Chris. He said to me, "You were really important in this." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah, because you kept out of my way." Okay, so again, he's 5 years younger, 5 days younger than I am, which he reminded me constantly. So I'm March 26th, he's March 31st. And so when March 31st would come around and go, "Hey, Barney, we're the same age." He says, "You will always be older than I am." And I say that because then, I mean, this is a long time ago. You know how old we are, so it's a long time ago. He comes to me and said, "I have a gift for you. I'm going to the floor to sing 'Will You Still Love Me, Will You Still Me When We're 64'." I said, "Oh, you can't do that. Come on, Barney, stop it." He goes to the floor. Did you ever think you'd hear him sing a Beatles song on the floor of the House? But he did. But in conclusion, did I say that already? This is my favorite story. Barney was being interviewed for a magazine article. Jim, you probably remember this. He was being interviewed for this article, and a young man was interviewing him for kind of a new magazine, I guess. And he said to him, "My editor wants to know what poignant quote has meant a lot to you that you still remember and draw upon." So Barney said, "Tell your editor that's easy for me. My most poignant quote is Jimmy Durante saying, 'Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are.' I've always wondered what that meant." And he asked me if I would be interviewed by this young person too. So he came to me and he said, "Help me with this. My editor said that's a great quote, but he wanted to know if we could change it to 'Good night, Ms. Calabash, wherever you are.'" No, I don't think so. Good night, Mr. Chairman Barney Frank. We know where you are. May you rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Chris Dodd, whose name will forever be associated with Barney Frank, and who Barney truly loved working with and felt very strongly and affectionate for. Chris?
I sort of feel like the fellow who followed Ted Williams playing baseball, following Nancy. Speaker Emeritus, thank you. That's Mayor, Governor, David, thank you immensely for your words. Now I'll bring you back to earth and talk about something practical that Barney was so instrumental in helping us achieve. So I thank Jimmy as well as others today who invited me to be here at this gathering. I appreciate it very much. And to you, Jimmy, and your team and staff, you've done a great job in bringing us all together here at Faneuil Hall. Before I begin these brief remarks, I do want to thank the staff who pulled this all together at this wonderful venue. It makes such a difference here, particularly talking about someone as dear to me as he was to many of you. You get a sense of almost a family here today. It's packed here in Faneuil Hall, but it's packed with friends and people who knew Barney so well. And so I'm honored that I was asked to participate as well in these gatherings here as well. I don't have the longevity of relationship with Barney that goes back many years. A group of us sat around last evening and told stories about Boston and Massachusetts politics. I wish I had recorded it. It was a great bit of history here that only Barney could contribute to as well. Anyway, Barney and I both were elected to this House and Senate in 1980 and survived congressional seniorities process for the next 27 years to become chairs of the House Financial Services Committee and the Senate Banking Committee on the same day in January of 2007. Barney and I knew each other as part of our New England delegation, worked together closely with him on many, many issues, but candidly, we didn't know each other terribly well. Frankly, we were sort of an odd couple to begin with, I suppose, in certain people's minds. To begin with, a change, or to begin the change that occurred in 1907 changed everything. And in March of 2008, with the collapse of Bear Stearns and the growing crisis in the home mortgage markets. Today I want to share the relationship and partnership that Barney and I had developed over the 3 years between 2007 and 2010 to restore the country's confidence in our financial institutions, to modernize and reform the architecture of our financial services for the 21st century, and repair the historic damage done to our country and millions of our fellow citizens. Well, Joe, the statistics were frightening. Some have argued that as many as 5 million homes were foreclosed in that period of time. We had thousands, millions of jobs. 8 million jobs were lost as a result of the crisis that occurred. And it has been predicted that some $13 trillion were lost in wages of the national wealth of our country. So after the 36 years I served in Congress, as many others have observed here this morning, was generally a climate of cordiality and friendship, as well as a willingness to listen and consider colleagues' points of view. Many of those common relationships in Congress have diminished, unfortunately, for many reasons. But there was someone named Barney Frank who was different. Even those who strongly disagreed with Barney were interested in hearing what Barney had to say about an issue. Barney was bright, as all of you know, but as important, Barney was extremely knowledgeable of the Congress, and he would give serious consideration of a colleague's point of view. Case in point was, of course, his relationship with Mike Oxley, who was the Republican congressman who chaired the committee, the Financial Services Committee, prior to Barney's assuming the chairmanship of that committee. And together, they did a number of good things as well. So Barney was capable of bipartisanship, as has been mentioned here before. It was one of his qualities that made him so successful as a member of Congress and as a member of the House. Even before Barney and I worked together on financial reform issues, I had a deep admiration for Barney's abilities, his progressive politics, his intelligence, his legislative skills, and of course his wonderful sense of humor. As an example of that humor, during the consideration of our bill, Barney said he actually considered seriously making a campaign bumper sticker that read, and I quote, "Things would have sucked worse without Barney." And, in fact, I have a collector's item right now. Anyway, it was part of his wonderful sense of humor as well. Of course, however, as significant and important as those qualities were, his skills, his brains, his intelligence, his sense of humor, there's another quality that Barney had that I admired most, and that was the quality of courage, both personally and politically. He was courageous and politically courageous. Barney may have been the only person standing on an issue, but he would speak his mind to anyone who would listen. And so his courage is something I valued deeply today we lack the kind of courage we expect in a moment like we're living through. But Barney Frank was courageous to his core on matters that he believed in deeply, and I admired that most about him along the way. And I would be remiss if I did not mention some of the matters on which we worked together before or after working on the Dodd-Frank bill. We partnered on the Economic Recovery Act to support our troubled housing industry, including finance giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And while neither Barney nor I were enthusiastic about it, we worked with the Bush administration to enact the Economic Stabilization Act to rescue financial institutions, homeowners, other industries such as the auto industry, and many other who all also benefited. Bush's term insisted that former financial persons be allowed to claw back their resources, their money. Barney and I took the very clear position that we would support, of course, an effort to get back on our feet, and there was a very unpopular motion to include the resources that were necessary. But we didn't allow that to be included in the Economic Stabilization Act. Barney was a valued partner. He not only had a good feel for the workings of the House, as you heard from Speaker Pelosi, but he had a very good understanding of the Senate as well, which was not that common. Together, we passed the Credit Card Act of 2009 and created the long-awaited, and I see Elizabeth Warren here, my friend, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So congratulations. Now, normally you'd better go down the list of other colleagues of yours who are here as well, John Kerry and Ed Markey as well, members of the Congress who come together to be a part of the ceremony today. Our efforts consumed more than 3 years. In the Senate, I needed to produce 60 Senate votes to overcome the Republican filibuster of the bill. Barney told me he had to navigate through many, many House caucuses, I would say to the Speaker. But more than anything else, of course, the major reason why we were able to pass that piece of legislation, the so-called Dodd-Frank legislation, was the relationship we had formed together over those 3 years. We trusted each other deeply in terms of what we could do together to get this done. And we communicated continuously, almost on a daily basis, and trying to reach the right conclusions about how to pass this bill. Those 3 years of our pension, we backed each other every single day. That's the kind of member of Congress, the kind of leader that Barney Frank was. We worked together. We trusted each other to achieve the legislation. Barry and I retired from Congress soon after the Dodd-Frank legislation was passed. It was an important bill, and it couldn't have happened without Barney. More than 16 years ago, after the passage of our bill, Barney sent a photo of the two of us taken at 6 a.m. on the morning of the day that we passed the conference report between the House and the Senate bills. Barney's generous inscription captures exactly how I felt then and feel today about Barney Frank. He is a dear friend, as a partner in a tough battle. You're a good company, he said. I should point out as well that many have raised the issue, why isn't this called the Frank Dodd bill rather than the Barney? And Barney sort of joined that group at one point. Congressman Ken Jaworski, a very good friend of Barney's, sitting on the Financial Services Committee of the House, proposed that the bill in the last minute or so at about 6 a.m. in the morning, that we ought to call the bill the Frank Dodd bill. But typically Barney, moving much quicker than anyone else in the room, said, "No, we can't do that," he said. "Chris Dodd may change his first name to Frank." And then he'll claim all the credit for the bill. He said, "No, we got to call it Dodd-Frank," and that's how it became the bill along the way. So I thank Barney for all of that. He was a perfect legislative partner in many ways. Barney had a full and productive life, and all of us here and millions more, not only in Massachusetts, New England, but across this country, and frankly around the world as well. We're in better shape today in many ways because Barney Frank served the people of his district, but more importantly, he reached far beyond the borders of his own state and country, made a significant contribution. In fact, if I were to be asked to name the most successful members that I served with, I would include a number of people from the Massachusetts delegation. My dear friend, and she's here today, Vicki Kennedy, as well. Ted Kennedy and I were terribly close. John Kerry and I worked together for many years. Ed, you and I cared about a lot of the same issues. But Barney Frank was special. And so I can't begin to tell you, particularly you, Jimmy, and the former staff members of Barney's, how deeply honored I am to have been invited to be a part of this ceremony here today. Congratulations. Godspeed, Barney. Good luck. I'm going to let Speaker Pelosi look at this, but I'm keeping it myself.
Thank you, Chris. Chris mentioned staff members, and I just wanted to, so many came up from Washington. I wanted to see if the staff members would stand who are here, who work for Barney. Thank you all for coming. The loyalty to Barney from his staff and the competence of that staff was just incredible. Thank you very much. Next, former Lieutenant Governor and President of the class of 1972, Tom O'Neill.
David Frank, you got it exactly right. The greatest sticker I ever saw and the greatest house sign I've ever seen was, "Neatness isn't everything." And that was Barney's from the get-go. And it was a personification of Barney Frank. I can remember being across the street at the Bostonian Hotel a few years back at an event for former legislators. And Barney was in the middle of the crowd admonishing one. He said, "John, I know you can't remember the guy's name, but I know you have 5 reasons that you can remember it that you don't like him for." So this morning we're honoring a man with a voice, intellect, courage, and humor that left an unforgettable mark on Massachusetts politics and that of the country, and for everybody that ever had the privilege of meeting him. I once heard Mo Udall in the halls of Congress speak about the passing of Hubert Humphrey. Mo Udall was a very funny man, a congressman from Arizona. And after weeks of eulogizing Hubert Humphrey, he finally got up on the floor and Udall said, "You know, everything that can possibly be said about the great man from Minnesota has been said. Unfortunately, everyone hasn't had a chance to say it." So here I am today, giving my voice to speak on our dear, dear friend. I first met Barney in 1969. We were volunteers for a very special election for Mike Harrington, who was running for Congress. We were both campaign coordinators. And that's when our friendship began. And I got to know a very important, but a very impatient, and a very impressive, and a very, very funny Barney Frank. In '72, which has now been talked about a few different times, he and I both got elected with 61 other members to the class of 1972 in our House of Legislation. I think everybody that didn't come from that class but served in the legislature was so sick of hearing about the class of '72 they've just about had it. But in that class we had a very young, and still is young, man who's running for re-election for the U.S. Senate, Eddie Markey. We also had Brian Donnelly and Billy Delahunt, who became future members of Congress, as well as Mel King and Doris Bunty, who have already been talked about, who really had a terrific stake and impact on the city of Boston and on the state of Massachusetts. Other members of our class became constitutional officers, judges, successful lawyers, and legislators, a lot of whom are here today. I was, as Jimmy will remind you, president of that class, but make no mistake about it, I was not the leader. Oh my God, he's now writing books about we have to go back to the Central. Thank you, Barney, for your great leadership, because he showed us the way to do it back so many years ago. Barney approached every challenge with extraordinary intelligence and determination. He was aggressive without being abrasive. He believed until the day he passed away, the government could be a force for good, that it would help people. And that's just the way he served the people of his 5th Suffolk District and the people of his country for the 30 years that he was in Congress. You know, Barney was many things, but he wasn't only a legislator. As the governor has pointed out, he was a true trailblazer. He was unbelievable, a champion for justice and one of the most gifted public servants of our generation. And to say the least, he was authentic. He never pretended to be something that he wasn't. You know, Barney loved his friends, loved being with you all at gatherings, either with former legislators or members of Congress that he served with. It wasn't uncommon for him to drive from his main house down to Boston or to Cape Cod to be with old friends. He was one of the most anchored people I've ever met. Whether you were his family, any Democrat he ever met, any legislative body, anybody he served with in Congress, you were his family, and he referred to you as his family. We are one, and we work together. My dad, Tip O'Neill, often said that all politics is local. I think Barney understood that as well as anybody. Beneath the national debates and the legislative battles, he never lost sight of the fact that he was there to serve people. He knew the public policy ultimately comes down to human lives, families seeking opportunity, workers striving for security, and individuals longing to be treated with dignity and respect. I'm sure you've all heard the story, but this is actually the way it went down. It was mid-July of 1988. Barney called me to say that he was going to the convention in Atlanta a couple of weeks later, but he was going to very publicly come out of the closet, and he was bringing a male friend with him. When I called my dad and give my father a heads up, which I was more than happy to do. So I called my father, and a long pause. He said, "You know something, that's too bad. I really thought Barney Frank was going to be the first Jewish Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives." He worried with good reason about that, because he thought if Barney came out in that time, it would make the speakership for him impossible. Barney wasn't special because he was gay. He wasn't special because he was Jewish. And he wasn't special because he was left-handed. Those were attributes. Barney was special because of the way he was as a person, as a man. His greatest legacy may be the courage he showed simply by living openly and honestly. He helped change the course of American history, not only through legislation, but through his own good example. He demonstrated that authenticity is a form of leadership and that progress often begins when somebody is willing to stand up and be seen. I miss my great friend, Barney Frank. I miss his friendship, his leadership, and his public service, and I know you all do as well. God love you. God bless Barney Frank.
The former and future chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal.
Thanks, Jim, very much, and thanks to all of you who have so faithfully assembled. And a special note of appreciation for Jim Siegel, his unyielding loyalty to Barney Frank for decades. I think it's a testament to and to Jim and to Barney's family as well. Thanks for the honor. Delighted that he would have asked me to offer some thoughts about his role within the delegation. He called me about 2 months ago, and he was checking on some facts for his book. And so I said, "But Barney, how are you doing?" And he said, "I'm going blind, I can't walk, and my heart's failing. But other than that, okay." And that was Barney. George W. Bush, sitting next to me at a luncheon a long time ago, he said to me, "Richie, how am I doing in Massachusetts?" And I said, "Really, Mr. President, not very well." And he said, "Is it unanimous yet?" I said, "No, but you're getting us there." And he said, I like tangling with all of you in Massachusetts. He said, because when I tangle with you, I tangle with the best. And Barney was central, I think, to that argument. Joe Biden, as vice president, getting off a plane here in Boston as president, said the same thing about the Massachusetts delegation. We come from a tough political culture here. Presidents, cabinet members, committee chairmen, speakers of the House, presidential aspirants, you name it. And it just doesn't happen. Barney asked me some years ago, a reporter was doing a piece on him, and he said, look, you talk to this reporter. And I said, sure. And the reporter said, well, how has Barney Frank come this far as an outsider? I said, well, he might be an outsider in his argument, but he's an insider in mastering the arcane details of legislative life. That is one of the most important considerations, I think, in Barney's career. Certainly a titan for labor, a champion of civil liberties, gay rights, when nobody was talking about it. As the governor correctly noted, he was doing these things and saying these things when they weren't popular. That's, I think, the arc of triumph that we celebrate with this life. Now, many of those issues are popular, and he would have been considering answering the next challenges. But that detail that he had, whether we worked together on the New Bedford fishermen and how tax was collected and where it was collected, the point of collection, today, those are some of the achievements, and he used to laugh about them when we would go back and forth. When he was asked by the Secretary of Defense to support the B-2 bomber, the Secretary said, it's a great piece of military apparatus. You can't see it, and radar cannot detect it. To which Barney said, well, why don't we just tell the Russians we have it and save a few bucks? I was standing next to Barney and Speaker Pelosi and Rahm Emanuel on the floor on the day that the first TARP bill went down and markets collapsed. And without missing a beat, standing next to him, he looked at the Speaker and he said, we have to say immediately we're going to raise the FDIC guarantee to $250,000 to prevent a run on our banks. And he said, we can't do it right away, but we have to say it so that we'll prevent pandemonium and contagion taking place in our markets. And my goodness, we did it in record time. Not again because you wanted to do it or you liked doing it, because you had to do it. When Heath Shuler, who was a Blue Dog Democrat from North Carolina and a very nice guy, also a former quarterback for the Washington Redskins, he was on the banking committee when Barney was the chair. He jumped on the tram one day going over from Rayburn to the Capitol, and he said to Barney, Mr. Chairman, I am so sorry. I have to vote against you on one of your amendments today. Barney looked at him and said, you keep feeling sorry as long as you keep calling me Mr. Chairman. And it brings me to this point that I think is essential and part of the debate we're having today across America. Barney Frank knew how to count. He knew what you could get passed. You could make great aspirational arguments, but the reality was if you wanted it to impact people's lives, and that's how you change lives for the better, legislatively, when it becomes law. So this notion all of a sudden in American life that Barney is taking a contrary position in the later stages of his time, he always took that position. I'm going to tell you a pretty interesting story, and I think I saw Chet was here, and I think Eddie and Brian Donnelly at the time. Silvio Conti was the member of Congress from the 1st Congressional District. He came from Pittsfield. Silvio held that seat for close to 40 years. He was the top Republican on the Appropriations Committee, and he actually figured out how to win the Democratic nomination for Congress and the Republican nomination for Congress. To say that he was ambidextrous would be a safe assessment. So Silvio was sick, and we wanted to win that seat in the worst way. We figured that it would help immeasurably if we could have the last seat. I think there were 11 of us at the time, and there's 9 today. So as we came up with this strategy, our nominee was John Olver. And the Fish and Wildlife Preserve was in Newton, Massachusetts. There's nothing harder to do in Congress than moving a federal agency to another part of the state or the country. So in this deliberation we had in the delegation, we said, John Oliver's a champion of environmental rights for sure, so why don't we say that it's because of John Oliver that we're going to move the Fish and Wildlife Preserve from Newton, Massachusetts to Hadley, Massachusetts. So Barney walked into the room, and we're sitting there, and he knew something was up. So we laid out the plan. Now, generally, there'd be a ferocious reaction because nobody ever described him as being warm when he got going. So we laid out the plan how we were going to move these jobs from Newton, Massachusetts to Hadley, Massachusetts, and say it was John Oliver's astute leadership that has brought us to this moment. He thought about it for a couple of minutes, and he said, so it means I take the dive? And we said, yes. And he said, it means we win the seat? We said, yes. He said, I take the dive. And I call attention to that because it's not the argument about perfection. We seek perfection. But Barney understood as one of the most capable legislators that I've ever served with and have known. In a city today and a state that has given so much to the concept of American liberty, thank you, Barney Frank.
Thank you, Richie. The former and future chairman of the House Rules Committee, Jim McGovern.
Well, I don't know how the hell you follow all of that, but in any event, I am so honored to be here with so many extraordinary leaders from our Commonwealth and country to remember our dear, dear friend Barney Frank. And to Jim and the rest of Barney's family, friends, and staff, Lisa and I are heartbroken for you, and I know how much you all meant to Barney and how much he meant to all of you. But I am so honored to talk about Barney's legacy today. I could tell Barney Frank stories all day. The problem is that most of them are absolutely not suitable to repeat in public at a gathering like this. But some of you may not know this, but when I first got elected, Barney and I shared the city of Fall River. And I remember right after I was sworn in, we did a public event together. And I think it was at the Venus de Milo in Swansea. And anyway, anyway, he was supposed to speak, and I was supposed to speak, and then we were going to take some questions. So he got up and he spoke. He was funny. He was, brilliant. And I got up and I gave my speech, and I was so-so. And anyway, then first question that comes up, this woman. I could tell she looked mean, and she was getting to the microphone, and she zeroed in on me. She said, McGovern, what a jerk. What an idiot. I'm so embarrassed that you're in Congress. You make me sick. She went on and on and on. I was like, oh, my God, what's going on here? And I want you to answer that question for me. I'm like, what? So I get up, I start walking toward the mic, and then Barney stands up, puts his arm in front of me, and says, I'll take this one. And he says, you constituents don't like us politicians? Well, guess what? Some of you constituents aren't any bargain either. And I sat there and I said to myself, holy shit, I can't believe he just said that, right? And then he goes, okay, now you could go answer. And I went up and I said, I have nothing to add. And, But that was Barney. I mean, if you needed backup, he was there for you. And if you were a bully, he would cut you down to size and leave no survivors. And let's not even get into Barney and the media. The press was intimidated by Barney Frank, but they loved him. I mean, how could you not? He was so quotable. A few weeks back, a former Boston Globe reporter told me that he was her best source. And she called him one day after he had retired, and Barney picked up the phone and shouted, I can't talk to you. I'm on an artificial beach in Dubai. And he hung up the phone. Now, Like, who comes up with that stuff, right? I mean, he didn't need caller ID. He came pre-annoyed. I worked for Joe Moakley during the 1980s and his staff, and you know, and I every time I'd walk into his office and Barney came on TV, Moakley would say to me, "Shut up, sit down. This is going to get good." And you know what? It always was good because nobody debated like Barney, and there was nobody that Republicans feared more debating on the House floor than Barney Frank, because he listened. He responded with some of the most devastating comebacks I've ever heard. I mean, I remember one time I was on the floor while he argued in favor of tougher financial industry rules. This was a lead-up to Dodd-Frank. A Republican, Jerry Lewis, the congressman, not the comedian, interrupted him. "Would the gentleman slow down? I'm having trouble keeping up." And Barney, without missing a beat, goes, "I will not slow down. The gentleman is just going to have to speed up." And then he added with a smirk, "And I can deliver a transcript to the gentleman's office in large font if he needs understanding." Even the Republicans laughed. But to Barney, the point wasn't the punchline, not when something bigger was at stake. The financial sector had melted down, people had lost jobs and homes, and families were struggling. You know, the government ought to do something to fix it, and Barney Frank made sure that we did. Barney was always quick on his feet, but he saved his sharpest retorts for the people who deserved it most, for the haters and the bigots, for the people who punched down, for the pearl-clutching snake oil salesmen who offered division and discord. He was funny and he was fierce, but his passion had a purpose, and that is the Barney Frank that I want to remember today. See, Barney understood that the moral test of a society is how it treats people in the dawn of life, the twilight of life, and in the shadows of life. The children, the elderly, the sick, the vulnerable, and the forgotten. And long before he ever got elected to Congress, as David pointed out, Barney went down to segregated Mississippi in 1964 to register voters during the Freedom Summer. And you know why he did that? He told us. It was because he was the same age as Emmett Till, and he said he just could not justify not being there. Before the fame and before the chairmanship, there was just a young guy who knew that something was wrong, and he knew that he needed to do something about it, and he never, ever, ever stopped. Barney lived his life fighting against poverty, greed, and injustice, and fighting against the people who were to blame. He fought for affordable housing because he knew that it is immoral that in a country as great as ours that people were sleeping in the streets. He fought against hunger because he believed that in the richest country in the history of the world, no child should go to bed hungry. And he fought for gay rights not only because he was gay, but because he saw a community that was being persecuted and bullied by people in power, and he could not tolerate a bully. He was a champion for those who were left out and left behind. You know, I talked to him a few days before he died, and I had talked to him the previous week, and he sounded like he was getting stronger. His voice was stronger. So I thought he was going to be around for a lot longer. And I said to him, I said, "You sound great." He goes, "Yeah, all the press attention is healing." But as we reminisce, and as we remember the landmark bills that he wrote and the projects that he funded and the barriers he broke, I want us to remember the Barney who would want us to pick up where he left off. The Barney who would remind us that there is too much greed, injustice, and unfairness in this world, too much despair and hopelessness. Barney would not want us to pull the shade even now when times are particularly tough for this country and the world. He would want us to say something. He would want us to do something. Barney was a patriot. He loved this country, and he believed if you love something, you fight for it. So let us honor his memory, not just with words, but with deeds. Let us challenge his wisdom and his wit to carry on the causes that he cared about. Let us be a little less tolerant for cruelty and cynicism, And let us find a little more courage to stand up to the demagogues and the bullies. Let us be... Let us be brave enough to fight, decent enough to care, and annoyed enough to make a difference. Barney was all three, and then some. So we are better off because he was here. The world will miss him. I already do. We love you, Barney.
Thank you, Jim. Next is Jim Reddy, Barney's husband, whose marriage I went to in 2012. I'm wearing the jacket and tie. And DeVal Patrick was the officiant at that, and it's the first same-sex marriage of a sitting congressman. Jim cared for Barney, especially in the last few years. Had a wonderful marriage from 2012 on, but I was up there a lot, and I just saw how caring Jim was with Barney as he got older and was in hospice. So, Jim, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. This is just overwhelming, the outpouring of support and love. She's from our friend from Singapore. There's a bunch of people from Tibet here even. Portugal, our friend came from Portugal, and just so many others. It's unreal. Barney wanted to be cremated. He didn't want a funeral or any big to-do, but we told him, and like with Jimmy and our dear friend Jeff Browning. I don't know where he's seated. I think he's up there, actually. He's moving up so nobody can see him. But he's a dear friend. He's the most capable person I've ever known. He helped me with all of this. But so he wanted to be cremated, and when I went to choose an urn, there were, all the sort of generic-y ones. And then I turned, and there was one. It was amazing. It was a lighthouse. And I just felt that was perfect because he's a beacon of light. He kept so many people from crashing on the rocks of life just by showing his example, his strength, and humility, humor, all of that. Oh, man. Just so you know, the week leading up to this was harder than the years caring for him. Like, this has been harder by far. Oh, man. So keep it short and sweet. He always said everybody knows about the bucket list. Everybody should have a bucket list. Well, there's a more important list, and that list rhymes with bucket. Okay? So do all your bucket lists, but then that other list is far more important as we get older, as people retire and stuff. He said that was just one of the best ones. I wanted to use one of his jokes, of course. And I was just a little nervous because every time, even this morning, I couldn't even say his name without breaking down. And I'm really surprised that I'm not right now. I kind of think I covered it. Well, they actually covered everything, and amazingly. So just thank you, everybody, for coming, and your calls and texts and everything were great. The cards, I think I have 5 pounds of mail that I have to, thank you notes and stuff. But anyway, I think I'll close with that. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and at the reception we'll do a little more personal conversations. Is that okay? Is that good?
Thank you, everybody.
Marty Mann, former congressman who served with Barney, and now the president of the University of Massachusetts. Marty?
Thank you very much. The last speaker at last. Jim, that was awesome, and we thank you for making Barney so happy and for taking care of him. We all owe you a tremendous debt. We all know Barney could be tough, caustic, very tough. And I don't mean just with reporters, but did I love listening to him yell at reporters. Oh, man. He would say things that I would love to say, but wouldn't say it because they were reporters. He just had that way about him, but he also yelled at the people who he agreed with and the people who he was friendly with. Now, we've been here a while. We need a little bit of exercise. How many people here have ever been yelled at by Barney Frank? That's beautiful. So I left the Congress, and I went up to UMass Lowell, and I was teaching a course on the Congress. So I called Barney up, and I said, Barney, will you come up and speak to my class? He said, let me check, I'll get back. He gets back, he said, yeah, I'll be up there. 6 weeks, I'll be there, I'm free. By the way, I have this friend, Jim Reedy, that I'm bringing with me, and his father is coming as well. They're a family from Lowell, and I want to show them around, and so we'll be up there. So I'm teaching this course in Colburn Hall that was built in 1896, and it's a week before Barney's coming. And I'm walking up to the classroom. And I get in the classroom and I say, we've got to change the location. I am not having Congressman Frank walking up 4 sets of stairs to speak to this class. And they said, well, why? Because he's going to yell at me for 10 minutes. He's going to have 2 state statutes, 3 regulations, the Disabilities Act, and 4 federal statutes, and he's going to yell at me for being in violation of all of those statutes for 10 minutes. And they said, well, that's not bad. We'd enjoy watching that. I said, here's the thing with Congressman Frank, though. He may say, come and I'll speak as soon as you get your elevators in the building and renovate the building, and then you'll miss out on the opportunity for 70 minutes of one of the best members of Congress that ever lived. And we actually had a great day that day. But Barney was just awesome. I remember one time we had a competitive delegation in Massachusetts, and everybody worked hard. So my staff came in to me and they said, Marty, no, they said Congressman. I said, call me Barney. We have a bill that you filed and Barney Frank's against it. And CNN wants to have a debate with you two. And I said, oh, really? Oh, yeah, it's going to be 9 o'clock prime time. I said, let me just tell you guys something. I am not debating Barney Frank on CNN or any place. If you want me to debate Barney Frank on a bill, I'll either get down to his office or he can come to my office and we have a nice, quiet conversation. One of the toughest things in the 14 years I was there, kind of embarrassing, that we were an all-male, white male delegation, and you know, Senator Kennedy and Senator Kerry would all get together every other year for photographs. And it was, you know, we come from one of the most progressive states, arguably the most progressive congressional delegation in the country. And I remember saying to Barney, geez, we shouldn't do this. I don't like getting together like this. He said, look, Marty, you're the one with the problem. You guys are the problem. I mean, here I am, a left-handed, gay, Jewish guy I'm fine. You guys are the ones without the diversity. Now, I can hear Barney in my ear saying, okay, Marty, let's wrap it up. It's been a long event. So I want to say that the gentleman from Massachusetts, Maine, and New Jersey's time has expired. To Barney Frank, thank you for your extraordinary service to your state and your country. Thank you to all of you who are here, and to Jim Siegel for the job you've done. And you're welcome to join us at the UMass Club. Thank you.